Mom left me when I was 7. No goodbye, no note, no reason. 21 years later, she came back, with a smug son she raised instead of me, and demanded I give her my house. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lena, I'm 28, and I live in a small town in Ohio. I work as a nurse at the local hospital, and for the first time in my life, things finally felt steady. I had a quiet home, a little garden I took care of, and no one to hurt me anymore. My mom, Carla, had disappeared when I was a child. She left me with nothing, just a suitcase full of clothes and a heart full of questions. I grew up in foster care, bounced around from house to house, always wondering what I did wrong. Then one cold morning, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, I froze. Standing there was Carla, older, thinner, but with the same sharp eyes I remembered. Beside her stood a boy, maybe 16, wearing expensive sneakers and a cocky grin. "This is your brother, Dylan," she said like it was the most normal thing in the world. My stomach dropped. I didn't even know I had a brother. Before I could say a word, she smiled and said, "We need a place to stay, sweetheart. Just for a little while. You've done well for yourself, haven't you?" Her tone wasn't kind. It was demanding. I was too stunned to speak. Part of me wanted to slam the door, but another part, the little girl who used to cry for her, wanted to believe maybe she came back because she cared. I let them in. Mistake number 1. They walked through my home like they owned it. Dylan threw himself on the couch, scrolling through his phone, while Carla complained about the small kitchen and cheap furniture. I stood there, holding my coffee mug, trying to process what was happening. Every word she said reopened an old scar. That night, I lay awake listening to them laugh in the guest room. I realized she hadn't come back because she missed me. She came because she needed something. I could feel it. Still, a small part of me hoped she might look at me and say she was sorry. That moment never came. In the morning, she handed me a grocery list. "If we're staying, you'll need to get these," she said flatly. "No thank you. No apology. Just expectation." I stared at her and asked quietly, "Why now, Mom?" She looked right through me and said, "Because family helps family." That's when I knew she wasn't my family anymore. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left crying at the window. I told myself they'd only stay for one night. That was the deal. But somehow, one night turned into 2, then a week, and then I couldn't remember what peace even felt like any. Carla moved through my house like she owned it, and Dylan followed her lead. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of cabinets slamming and Carla complaining about everything. "This coffee is weak," she'd say. "You really should buy better groceries, Lena." I bit my tongue until it hurt. Dylan wasn't any better. He threw his clothes everywhere, left dishes in the sink, and laughed when I reminded him to clean up. "Relax," he said once. "You act like this place is the White House." I worked long shifts at the hospital, and by the time I came home, my house no longer felt like mine. My shoes were moved, my mail opened, my couch covered in their things. Dylan started using my car without asking. One evening, I went to grab my keys, and they were gone. He came back hours later, blasting music, the tank almost empty. "You should thank me," he joked. "I got it out for a drive." Carla watched, smiling like it was normal. When I confronted her, she sighed and said, "He's just a boy. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." Her tone reminded me of every time she dismissed me as a kid, every time my feelings never mattered. The anger I'd buried for years began to rise again. Soon, Carla started dressing up more than usual. One afternoon, I came home early and saw her chatting with Mr. Weller, my landlord, outside. She was laughing, touching his arm, speaking softly. Later, she told me she'd worked something out about the rent. My chest tightened. "What do you mean work something out?" I asked. She just smiled and said, "Let's just say he'll be more flexible with payments now. You should thank me." That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The air in the house felt heavy, like it was no longer mine. They weren't guests, they were planting roots. I started noticing the way Carla rearranged furniture, the way she spoke about our home, as if she'd always lived there. Dylan even told someone on the phone that he just moved in with his sister. Every little thing chipped away at me. My patience, my control, my sense of safety. They acted like I owed them, like I was lucky they chose to stay. Carla's perfume lingered in every room, a reminder that she'd found her way back in, and this time she wasn't planning to leave. I watched her laugh at my landlord again the next morning, sunlight hitting her like a spotlight. That was the moment I finally admitted the truth. She hadn't returned to reconnect. She'd come back to take over everything I'd built without her. The sound of their voices in the next room blurred into a distant hum as my mind drifted back to that day, the one that shaped everything. I was 7, standing barefoot by the window, holding the stuffed bear I never went anywhere without. Rain hit the glass in thin streaks, and outside, Carla's car sat running. I remember her hair pulled up, a cigarette between her fingers, and the way she looked everywhere but at me. I begged her not to go. She didn't even turn around when she slammed the door. The tires splashed through the puddles, and that sound, wet gravel and fading engine noise, was the last thing I had of her. The present came rushing back when I heard a crash in the kitchen. Dylan had dropped one of my dishes and didn't even bother to pick it up. "It's just a plate," he said, laughing. I bent down to clean it while Carla leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, smirking. "You always were dramatic, Lena. You were better off without me back then. I gave you a chance to grow strong," she said, as if leaving me behind was some kind of gift. Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I turned away before she could see the tears form. She always had a way of twisting everything, turning cruelty into something noble. That night, when they finally went to bed, I went through the box of papers I kept in the closet. It held pieces of my past, foster care files, school notes, a few letters that were never mailed. Buried deep at the bottom was a thin stack of envelopes with her name written in neat, old handwriting. I recognized it immediately. They were bank letters, dated around the time she left me. I opened one, then another, my hands trembling. The numbers on the statements told the truth. She'd had money. Plenty of it. She hadn't disappeared because she couldn't take care of me. She'd left because she didn't want to. The air left my lungs in one slow exhale. Every lie, every fake apology she'd thrown my way since coming back, all of it unraveled in that moment. When I woke the next morning, my bedroom was a mess. Dylan had been in there, clothes thrown on the floor, my photo frames broken. My childhood bear lay in the corner, its head torn halfway off. "You shouldn't keep junk like this," he said when I confronted him, smirking like it was funny. "You're pathetic." The word hit me harder than I expected. I didn't answer him. I just picked up the bear, set it on the dresser, and smiled quietly. Something inside me shifted. Carla thought she could guilt me. Dylan thought he could bully me. They both believed I'd stay small and scared. But I wasn't that little girl by the window anymore. And soon enough, they were going to learn what that meant. I couldn't sleep after finding those letters. The numbers, the proof, it all circled in my head like a storm that wouldn't pass. I needed to know what else she was hiding. Over the next few days, I started digging quietly. Every time Carla and Dylan left the house, I searched her things, old purses, folded papers in her bags, the pockets of her coat. Most were empty, but one small notebook tucked inside her handbag caught my eye. It held names, phone numbers, and short notes beside each. Good with money, owns a car, likes expensive gifts. I realized it wasn't a contact list. It was a record of the men she'd used. The pattern became clearer when I called an old neighbor from the foster home days. She remembered seeing Carla years back, always with a new boyfriend, always leaving after a few months. A friend from my nursing job helped me check public records, and there it was: evictions, unpaid bills, false addresses. Carla hadn't just drifted through life. She'd been running scams. Back home, the tension was building. Carla had changed her tone with Dylan. She whispered to him when I walked into a room, stopped talking when I came near. He started giving me cold looks, rolling his eyes at everything I said. When I asked him to wash his dishes, he muttered, "You're not my mom." Carla smirked from the table and said, "He just needs a little patience, Lena. You've never been good with people." That night, I made dinner hoping to break the silence. It didn't work. Dylan complained about the food. Carla said it was too dry, and something in me snapped. I asked Carla why she even came back after all these years. She didn't answer right away, just stared at me like I'd insulted her. "Because family should take care of each other," she finally said, her voice rising. "Family owes family." Dylan slammed his hand on the table, the plate jumping, and before I could react, he threw it against the wall. The crash echoed through the house. I stood up, shaking, and pointed to the door. "Get out," I said quietly. Carla laughed, that same cruel sound I remembered from childhood. "You think you're better than us?" she hissed. "You wouldn't even have this place if it weren't for me." I didn't answer. I just opened the door and waited. They gathered their things slowly, muttering insults the whole time. As she stepped outside, Carla turned and gave me a look that chilled my blood. "Don't worry," she said softly, her lips curling. "I'll get what's mine soon." The door closed behind them, but her words stayed. I locked every window that night. Something told me she wasn't finished, and whatever she was planning next, it wouldn't be simple. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly inside a white envelope with the county seal. At first, I thought it was something routine, maybe a tax notice or property update. But when I opened it, the words blurred before my eyes. Carla had filed a legal claim stating that my home, the one left to me by my foster father, Richard, was her rightful inheritance. My stomach twisted. She wasn't bluffing when she said she'd get what was hers. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paper, every muscle in my body tight. Richard had been the only person who ever treated me like family. He gave me that house because he wanted me to have stability, something I'd never had before. Carla had never even visited him, and now she was trying to take his last gift away. I called the clerk's office to confirm, hoping it was some mistake. It wasn't. She'd used my full name, address, and even listed fake documents claiming she'd been in touch with Richard before his death. My hands trembled as I hung up the phone. How could someone sink that low? I couldn't sit still. I drove across town to see Mrs. Turner, the neighbor who'd lived next door to Richard for years. She answered the door with her usual warm smile, but it faded the moment she saw my face. "It's about Carla, isn't it?" she said before I could even speak. I nodded. We sat at her kitchen table while she poured coffee. "I always hoped you wouldn't have to deal with her again," she said softly. Then she told me things I never knew. Years ago, after Richard passed, Carla had shown up at the house before the will was finalized. She'd taken boxes of my old belongings, school photos, art projects, even the small jewelry box Richard had given me. Later, Mrs. Turner learned that Carla sold most of it at pawn shops in another town. That's how she'd started her new life. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I imagined her walking through Richard's house, touching the things that meant something to me, selling off my memories for cash. The betrayal was so deep it burned. Every piece of kindness she'd shown since coming back had been an act. She wasn't here for family. She was here for property, for money, for control. I drove home in silence, the anger rising like heat under my skin. When I reached the porch, I looked at the windows, the walls, the front door, all of it built by a man who loved me when no one else did. I wasn't about to let her take it. That night, I spread the notice and my foster papers across the table, marking every lie she'd written. I wasn't just going to defend what was mine. I was going to tear down every lie she'd ever told. This time, she'd lose everything she thought she could steal. Days blurred into one long stretch of quiet fury. I spent every evening after work building a wall of proof against her lies. The dining table turned into a war desk, folders spread open, papers stacked, sticky notes everywhere. I called offices, dug through archives, and tracked down old witnesses. Each document I found painted a clearer picture of who Carla really was. There were police reports from years back, complaints from landlords, even statements from men she'd scammed. Piece by piece, I built the story she'd tried to bury. I stayed calm on the surface, polite to everyone I spoke to, but inside it was chaos. Every page I touched made me remember another lie, another broken promise. I didn't raise my voice or slam a door. I just kept working, focused and steady. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one, but on my terms. Meanwhile, Carla was busy crafting her own version of the truth. She went door to door around the neighborhood, spinning tales about how I'd turned my back on my own mother. People started looking at me differently, some with pity, others with quiet judgment. At the grocery store, I overheard someone whisper that I was heartless. Carla always knew how to twist sympathy until it bent in her favor. Then came the morning I found the word. It was written across my car in red paint, big, crooked letters that read selfish. My hands shook as I stared at it. Dylan stood across the street, watching with that same smug smirk he'd worn since the day they arrived. I didn't need proof to know it was him. When I called out his name, he just laughed and walked away, leaving me standing there with the smell of fresh paint and burning anger in my throat. That night, Carla showed up at my door again, pretending nothing had happened. She tried to act concerned, asked if I'd been having trouble with anyone lately. Her fake sweetness scraped at every nerve I had left. I told her to leave. She stepped closer instead. "After everything I've done for you," she hissed. "This is how you treat me?" I turned away, but she grabbed my arm. The sound of the slap came before I felt the sting. It echoed through the room, sharp and final. For a second, we both stood still, breathing hard. Then she leaned in, her voice low and cruel. "You were always the mistake I left behind." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at her, memorizing the face of the woman who'd spent her life taking. Without a word, I stepped back and pointed to the door. She left, muttering curses under her breath. When the door shut, the house fell silent again. My cheek throbbed, but my mind was clear. The storm she started was about to break, and this time it would hit her first. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and cold coffee. I sat in the hallway, folders stacked neatly in my lap, my pulse steady but slow. Across from me, Carla chatted with her lawyer, pretending she was calm. She wore a pale blue dress, pearls around her neck, that same polished smile she used when she wanted people to believe she was the victim. Dylan sat beside her, slouched and bored, tapping on his phone like none of it mattered. When the clerk called our case, we stepped inside the courtroom. The air felt heavy, each sound sharp against the walls. Carla greeted the judge with a sugary "Good morning, Your Honor," as if she were applying for an award. I took my seat quietly, keeping my eyes forward. My lawyer nodded to me once, a silent reminder to stay steady. Carla went first. Her voice trembled just enough to sound pitiful. She told stories about sacrificing everything for me, about how life had been cruel to her, how she deserved a second chance. She painted herself as the forgotten mother and me as the ungrateful daughter who'd locked her out. Dylan sat up straighter, smirking whenever she said something dramatic. It was like watching a performance she'd rehearsed her whole life. When it was my turn, I stood and opened the folder. My hands didn't shake. I began with the facts, dates, records, letters. I showed the eviction papers, police complaints, bank statements. I read aloud the words she'd signed years ago, selling my belongings after Richard's death. Every page was a stone laid at her feet. The room grew quieter with each one. Carla's smile started to fade. She tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced her. I didn't look at her. I just kept reading. When I finished, I told the court about the day she left me, the years I spent waiting, and the lies she'd spun to make herself look innocent. My voice stayed calm, but the truth was heavy enough to crush the mask she wore. The judge leaned back, flipping through the stack of evidence. He didn't take long. "This claim has no merit," he said firmly. "The property remains with Miss Reynolds." He tapped the gavel once. The sound felt like the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. Carla shot to her feet, face red, shouting that it wasn't fair. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but she kept screaming, her words slurring together. Anger, denial, desperation all mixed in one. Dylan stared at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. The woman he'd defended was unraveling right in front of him. As the officers guided her toward the door, she turned and glared at me, her voice cracking. "You'll regret this, Lena." But I didn't move. I just gathered my papers and walked out. Behind me, her shouts faded into the echo of the gavel, final, sharp, and mercifully quiet. 2 weeks after the ruling, the eviction notice arrived at their temporary address. Carla had been staying with a friend across town, still convinced she could find another way to come after me. But the court order was clear. She had no legal claim to anything tied to my name. I watched from my front porch as a moving truck pulled up outside her place. She shouted at the workers, waving papers in the air, her voice hoarse with fury. Dylan stood nearby, arms crossed, face pale. For the first time, he looked unsure of her. That evening, I changed the locks on every door. The sound of the new bolts clicking into place felt like closing a chapter. No more footsteps that didn't belong here, no more whispers in the dark. I walked through the quiet rooms, touching the walls as if to remind myself this space was mine again. The air felt lighter, but the ache underneath hadn't faded. I wanted to believe the worst was over, but a part of me knew she'd never stop unless someone made her. That thought stayed with me as I sat at the kitchen table later that night. My laptop glowed softly in the dim light. I hesitated before opening a blank email window. For days, I debated what to do with the pile of evidence that hadn't been used in court. Old financial records, proof of her fake names, the scams she'd pulled on men who didn't know what kind of woman they were dealing with. It would take only one message to set things in motion. I typed the name of one of her exes, a man she'd conned out of money years ago. I remembered finding his number in her notebook. My message was short and unsigned. I attached the documents and hit send. The moment the email disappeared from my screen, a strange calm washed over me. I wasn't proud, but I wasn't sorry either. A few days later, I heard through a mutual contact that an investigator had come looking. Apparently, one of those old scams involved falsified checks and stolen identities. The man I'd contacted must have shared the files with the authorities. Word spread quickly that Carla was under investigation. She tried calling me, but I didn't answer. When the phone finally stopped ringing, the house felt still again. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the late sunlight spill across the floor. I expected satisfaction, some rush of victory, but what came instead was quiet. The anger that had lived inside me for so long was finally gone, leaving behind only space. I didn't smile or cry. I just breathed slowly, deeply. Revenge hadn't fixed anything, but it had ended something. The constant fear, the waiting, the wondering when she'd strike next. For the first time, I didn't feel like a child looking out the window. I felt like someone who'd finally shut the door and locked it for good. Winter was beginning to fade when I heard the knock. It was late, past midnight, the kind of hour when no one decent visits. I almost ignored it, thinking it was a mistake, until I heard a quiet voice through the door. "Lena, it's me." The sound stopped me cold. When I opened it, Dylan stood there, thinner than I remembered, his face marked with bruises that looked days old. His jacket was torn, his shoes muddy. For a second, neither of us spoke. The boy who once strutted through my house with arrogance now looked smaller, worn down by something heavier than pride. He lowered his eyes. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, his voice rough from the cold. I stepped aside without a word, letting him in. He moved cautiously, as if unsure he was allowed to touch the floor. The warmth from the heater fogged the air around him. I made him sit at the table while I heated some soup. The silence between us stretched, broken only by the hum of the stove. Finally, he said, she's gone. His hands shook as he held the cup I gave him. Mom took off after the investigation started. She said I'd only slow her down. He laughed, but it came out hollow. Guess she was right. I sat across from him, watching the way he avoided my gaze. He looked like a reflection of something I used to be. Young, hurt, trying to pretend the pain didn't matter. You don't have to explain, I said quietly. But he did anyway. Words spilled out in broken pieces. How she'd lied to him, used him to do her dirty work, blamed him when things went wrong. How he finally realized every story she told about me had been false. I called you pathetic, he whispered. I said things I didn't mean. I just believed her. His voice cracked, and he pressed his hands against his eyes. I'm sorry, Lena. I looked at him for a long time. Part of me wanted to stay cold, to remind him of every cruel thing he'd done. But all I saw was a scared kid who never had a chance to be anything else. I stood up, grabbed a blanket from the couch, and handed it to him. You can sleep here tonight, I said. We'll figure out the rest later. He nodded, his shoulders shaking, trying not to cry. When he finally lay down, his breathing evened out, slow and tired. I sat nearby, staring at the faint glow from the streetlight through the window. I didn't feel anger anymore. What filled the space instead was something gentler, quieter. Maybe forgiveness wasn't possible, not for her. But for him, maybe there was still room. He wasn't my enemy. He was just another person left behind by the same woman who'd broken me. Spring arrived quietly, the kind that comes with soft rain and the smell of clean earth. I was folding laundry when the call came. A voice on the other end introduced himself as a detective from another state. He asked if I was related to Carla Reynolds. I hesitated before answering. Then he told me she'd been taken into custody for multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. Hearing her name spoken like that didn't bring relief or satisfaction, just a strange, steady calm. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long while, listening to the rain hit the windows. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. Her story had always been a circle of deceit, and this time it had finally caught up to her. She was where she belonged, and for once, I wasn't the one carrying the damage she left behind. That weekend, I drove out to the small town where my foster home used to stand. The road looked narrower than I remembered, lined with trees that had grown taller over the years. The house was still there, freshly painted, a new family living inside. I parked across the street and stayed for a moment, watching the windows glow softly through the drizzle. When no one was looking, I stepped out with a small bouquet of lilies and laid them near the front steps. They weren't for Carla. They were for the people who once gave me a place to belong when she wouldn't. I whispered a quiet thank you to the memory of Richard and to every version of myself that had survived since then. The rain soaked through my jacket as I stood there, but I didn't move right away. I thought about Dylan, still trying to rebuild his life, about how pain lingers even when the person who caused it is gone. Forgiveness didn't come to me, not for her. What came instead was release. The decision to stop letting her shadow stretch across every part of my life. When I drove back home, the streets were empty. The house greeted me with quiet warmth. I walked to the window, the same spot I used to stare from as a child, waiting for her car to come back. The glass reflected my own face now, older, steadier, not waiting for anyone. Outside, the world was fading into dusk. I looked for a long moment, then reached for the cord and pulled the blinds shut. The sound was small but final, the kind that settles in the air like an ending and a beginning at the same time. I turned away, leaving the window behind, and sat in the stillness. There were no words left to say, no apologies to wait for. Just quiet, the kind that finally felt like peace. Hey besties, thanks for staying with me till the end of this wild story. Imagine your mom disappearing for 21 years, then returning with another kid, trying to steal your home. Crazy, right? But sometimes the deepest betrayal teaches us how strong we really are. If this story hit you in the heart, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more real stories. See you next time. Bye.